It was December 16, 2000, a cold, misty morning in Tallahassee, Florida. Mike Williams, a 31-year-old real estate appraiser, kissed his wife, Denise, goodbye, and left their home for an early morning duck hunting trip at Lake Seminole. The lake was notorious for its murky, gator-infested waters, but Mike was an experienced outdoorsman who had hunted there countless times. When Mike didn't return by midday, Denise began to worry. She called friends and family, and soon a search party was organized. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, along with local law enforcement, scoured the area. What they found only deepened the mystery. Mike's truck, a green Ford Bronco, was parked near a remote boat launch. His boat was floating on the lake, undisturbed, with his shotgun and a box of decoys still inside. But Mike was nowhere to be seen. The working theory was grim, yet plausible. Mike had fallen overboard, and the lake's alligators had taken him. For months, the case lingered. Searchers combed the waters. Divers explored the lake bed, and cadaver dogs were brought in. Then, months later, a fisherman made a peculiar discovery. A pair of waders and a hunting jacket surfaced near the area where Mike had disappeared. The items were identified as Mike's, but something was off. The fabric showed no signs of tearing, no bite marks, nothing to suggest an alligator attack. Questions began to surface. How could an experienced hunter like Mike simply vanish? Why hadn't his body been found? And why did the items resurface months later, in seemingly pristine condition? Despite these doubts, the case went cold for 17 years. It was an open wound for Mike's family and friends, a chilling mystery that refused to fade. Then in 2017, the truth came out, and it was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Brian Winchester, a close friend of Mike's, came forward with a shocking confession. He admitted to murdering Mike that morning on Lake Seminole as part of a calculated plot orchestrated with Denise, Mike's wife. According to Brian, he and Denise had been having an affair for years. They devised a plan to get rid of Mike and collect his $175 million life insurance policy, a policy that Brian, an insurance agent, had helped Mike secure shortly before his death. On the morning of the murder, Brian joined Mike on the lake under the guise of a hunting trip. Their plan was to push Mike into the water, hoping he would drown. But things didn't go as smoothly as they had imagined. Mike managed to stay afloat, clinging to his boat. In a panic, Brian pulled out a shotgun and shot Mike at point-blank range. Brian then transported Mike's body to a remote area, where he buried it in a shallow grave. For years, the truth remained hidden, shielded by Brian and Denise's lies. But the partnership between the two conspirators began to crumble. Their marriage, built on betrayal and murder, became toxic. When Brian and Denise divorced, Brian used his knowledge of the murder as leverage to prevent Denise from testifying against him in court. But this leverage crumbled when Brian was arrested for kidnapping Denise during a bitter dispute in 2016. Facing a lengthy prison sentence, Brian finally broke and confessed to the murder. His confession led authorities to the spot where Mike's body had been buried for nearly 2 decades. The truth shocked the community. Denise was arrested and convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and other charges. Brian, in exchange for his confession, received immunity from the murder charge, but faced a 20-year sentence for his unrelated crimes. The revelation of this cold-blooded conspiracy, driven by greed and betrayal, sent chills down the spine of everyone who followed the case. What began as a simple disappearance on Lake Seminole turned into a dark tale of deceit, murder, and a web of lies that unraveled over 17 years. In the end, the discovery of Mike Williams's body brought closure to his family. But the horrifying truth of how he died left an indelible mark on the small community. It was the fall of 1983, and the small town of Somerset, Kentucky, was buzzing with rumors about Devil's Hollow, a dense, secluded forest just outside the town limits. The hollow had long been a source of fear among locals, with whispers of strange disappearances and unexplained phenomena. Most dismissed the tales as nothing more than folklore until one night when the rumors turned horrifyingly real. One of the most chilling cases tied to Devil's Hollow involved a group of teenagers, Jack, Emily, Ryan, and Sarah, all 17 years old. They had heard the rumors for years and, driven by curiosity and teenage bravado, decided to venture into the forest. Their plan was simple: camp overnight and see if the stories were true. The group entered the hollow just before sunset. The air grew colder and eerily quiet as they walked deeper into the forest. Even the usual sounds of crickets and birds seemed to vanish. They joked to calm their nerves, but the oppressive silence gnawed at them. As night fell, they set up their tent near a small clearing. Jack, the most skeptical of the group, laughed at the others' unease. "It's just trees and shadows," he said. But even he couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling creeping over them. 1:15 a.m. Emily was the first to hear it, a faint whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. At first, she thought it was one of her friends playing a prank. But when she looked around, everyone was still. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, Ryan pointed toward the trees. "Who's there?" he called out. A dark figure stood just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the dim light of their dying campfire. It didn't move or respond. Jack grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the figure, but it was gone. The group laughed nervously, convincing themselves it was an animal or a shadow. But deep down they knew better. 3:30 a.m. They awoke to the sound of branches snapping around their campsite. Sarah whispered, "Someone's out there." The flashlight flickered as Jack shone it into the darkness. What they saw made their blood run cold. Handprints large, muddy handprints smeared across their tent. Too high up to belong to any of them. Panic set in. They decided to leave immediately. As they packed up, the whispering began again, louder this time, coming from every direction. It sounded like a chorus of voices speaking in a language none of them recognized. As they stumbled through the forest, the whispers grew into a deafening cacophony. Shadows darted between the trees, too fast to be human. Emily screamed as something brushed against her arm, leaving behind a deep, ice-cold sensation. 4 a.m. When they finally emerged from the hollow, they collapsed onto the road, breathless and terrified. Jack noticed scratches on his arms and neck, though he couldn't recall how he'd gotten them. Emily clutched a necklace she didn't remember putting on, a crude, rusted charm that looked like it had been made decades ago. The group reported the incident to the local sheriff, but their story was met with skepticism. Search teams found no evidence of anyone else in the forest. However, they did find something chilling. Near the campsite, carved into a tree, was a symbol, a crude depiction of a human figure surrounded by flames. The teenagers never returned to Devil's Hollow, and over the years, their story became part of the town's lore. Some claimed it was a prank or a shared hallucination, but others believed the forest was cursed, a place where something ancient and malevolent lurked, waiting for its next visitors. To this day, locals warn against entering Devil's Hollow after dark. The forest remains untouched, a haunting reminder of the night 4 teenagers barely escaped with their lives. It was January 2nd, 1935, a cold winter evening in Kansas City, Missouri. A tall, well-dressed young man with dark hair walked into the lobby of the Hotel President, a luxury establishment in the heart of downtown. He introduced himself as Roland T. Owen and requested a room. The receptionist noted something odd about him. He carried no luggage, just a comb, a toothbrush, and toothpaste tucked into his pocket. Owen specifically asked for a room without a window facing the street. He was given room 1046, located in the quiet interior of the 10th floor. Strange behavior. The bellboy escorted Owen to his room and observed that the man seemed distracted, almost paranoid. Once inside, Owen asked peculiar questions. How many employees work here overnight? How often do guests leave the lobby after dark? Owen's demeanor grew stranger as the hours passed. He kept the room dark, leaving only a single lamp on, and ignored the curious glances of the cleaning staff. The maid, Mary Soptic, who serviced his room, later described him as nervous and brooding. He would sit motionless in the corner, staring at the floor, as if lost in thought or fear. Around noon on January 3rd, Mary returned to clean room 1046. This time, Owen asked her not to lock the door when she left, explaining that he was expecting a visitor. Later that afternoon, hotel staff noticed more strange behavior. A hotel operator overheard Owen speaking on the phone, saying, "Don't worry, I'm waiting for you to arrive." His voice was low and tense, as though he were whispering to avoid being overheard. By evening, guests began reporting unsettling noises from room U. 1046, a muffled argument could be heard through the walls. A man's voice shouted angrily, followed by the sound of heavy thuds and something scraping across the floor. But when staff knocked on the door, the room went silent. The discovery. The following morning, January 4th, The bellboy was sent to deliver a call to room Ing, 1046. After knocking and receiving no response, he unlocked the door with his master key. The scene inside was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Owen was sprawled on the bed, completely naked, covered in blood. Deep stab wounds crisscrossed his chest, and his head had suffered a severe trauma, likely from a blunt object. The bedsheets were drenched in crimson, and bloody handprints streaked the walls. Miraculously, Owen was still alive, barely. The bellboy called for help, and Owen was rushed to the hospital. When police questioned him at the scene, he muttered only a single cryptic word: "Nobody." The injuries were horrific: a fractured skull, ligature marks on his neck indicating attempted strangulation, and multiple stab wounds. Owen slipped into a coma. Anno died shortly thereafter. The investigation. When detectives examined the room, the mysteries multiplied. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting Owen had willingly let his attacker or attackers inside. The phone cords had been ripped from the wall, and every item Owen had brought with him, his comb, toothbrush, and toothpaste, was missing. Even stranger, the room's amenities, towels, soap, and other supplies were gone. The only clue was a mysterious note scrawled on a piece of paper: "I will be back tomorrow. Wait for me." The investigation revealed shocking details. Roland T. Owen was an alias. The man's real name and identity remained unknown. Witnesses reported seeing a woman visiting the room the previous night, but she was never identified. Another guest on the 10th floor reported hearing loud footsteps in the hallway around 4 a.m., followed by the sound of a door slamming shut. Yet no one had seen anyone leaving room 1046. Unanswered questions. The case only grew stranger in the days that followed. A woman claiming to be Owen's mother called the police to insist her son was innocent of any wrongdoing, but she refused to identify herself. Weeks later, a man identifying himself as a friend of Owen's sent funeral funds to the coroner with explicit instructions to bury the body in Kansas City, stating he had enemies. Adding to the mystery, Owen's funeral was sparsely attended, but two men dressed in black suits were seen lingering at a distance. They disappeared before they could be questioned. Despite the extensive investigation, the case went cold. No one came forward to claim the body, and the true identity of Roland T. Owen remains unknown. Lingering mysteries. Over the years, theories have emerged. Some believe Owen was caught in a love triangle that turned deadly. Others suspect he was involved in organized crime and paid the ultimate price for crossing the wrong people. But the most chilling theory suggests something far darker: that Owen was lured to room 1046 by an unseen force or a shadowy organization that orchestrated his death. Today, room 1046 no longer exists. It has been renumbered in an attempt to erase its grim history. But the haunting legacy of Roland T. Owen endures, a sinister reminder of how some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved. In 1804, John Bell and his family moved to a picturesque farm in Adams, Tennessee. Nestled among rolling hills and dense woods, the farm seemed like the perfect place for a peaceful life. For several years it was. John, his wife Lucy, and their children lived happily, tending their crops and enjoying the tranquility of their rural home. But by 1817, the peace shattered. It began subtly, almost innocently, a faint tapping on the walls of their house late at night. At first, the family dismissed it as the wind or perhaps animals scurrying outside. But the noises grew louder and more persistent. Knocks became bangs, and soon they could hear the sound of chains dragging across the floor, even though nothing was there. One night, as the family gathered in the living room, they heard a faint whisper. The words were too soft to understand, but the voice was unmistakably human. Lucy Bell clutched her youngest child to her chest, her eyes darting around the room. "Who's there?" John called out, but no one answered. The entity reveals itself. As days turned into weeks, the disturbances intensified. The Bell children began reporting sightings of strange animals around the property. Betsy, the youngest daughter, claimed she had seen a massive dog with glowing eyes and the head of a rabbit standing at the edge of the woods. When she screamed, the creature vanished into thin air. Soon the entity made its presence known in a chilling way. It began speaking. At first it was just murmurs, incoherent and fragmented. But over time, its voice became clearer, stronger. It introduced itself as Kate, though it never explained who and what it truly was. Kate seemed to have a purpose, tormenting the Bell family. She particularly targeted John and Betsy. At night, Betsy would wake up screaming, her face covered in red welts, as if she had been slapped by an invisible hand. Her hair was often found tied into tight knots, yanked so forcefully that it left her scalp bleeding. John Bell fared no better. The entity taunted him relentlessly, mocking him and calling him vile names. His health began to deteriorate, as if the very life was being drained from him. He experienced violent facial twitching and struggled to swallow his food. Doctors were baffled, unable to explain his symptoms. Visitors experienced the terror. Word of the Bell Witch spread quickly. Neighbors, skeptics, and even clergymen visited the Bell home, hoping to witness the phenomena for themselves. They weren't disappointed. One night, a group of neighbors gathered in the Bell's living room, sitting in tense silence. Suddenly, the air grew icy cold, and a disembodied voice echoed through the room. "You shouldn't have come," it growled. Before anyone could react, the sound of loud footsteps filled the room, circling the group. A candle was snuffed out, plunging them into darkness. The visitors fled, vowing never to return. Perhaps the most famous guest was future President Andrew Jackson. Intrigued by the tales, Jackson and his men traveled to Adams to see the haunting for themselves. As they approached the Bell property, their wagon wheels suddenly froze in place. No matter how hard the horses pulled or how much the men pushed, the wagon wouldn't budge. A cold, mocking voice filled the air. "You'll go no further," it said. Jackson, a hardened soldier, was visibly shaken. The wagon only moved again after Jackson and his men begged for forgiveness. The death of John Bell. By late 1820, John Bell's condition had worsened. He rarely left his bed, his once strong frame now frail and emaciated. Kate's voice became a constant presence in his room, whispering cruel taunts and laughing at his suffering. On the morning of December 20th, John Bell was found dead. A mysterious black vial sat on his bedside table. The family, desperate for answers, tested the liquid on a cat. The animal died instantly. Kate's voice rang out triumphantly. "I fixed him!" The Bell family buried John in the local cemetery. But even in death, he found no peace. During his funeral, Kate's voice echoed through the crowd, singing hymns in a mocking tone. The aftermath. After John's death, the hauntings lessened but didn't stop entirely. Kate promised to return 7 years later, and true to her word, the disturbances resumed briefly in 1827 before fading into history. The Bell Witch legend has endured for over 2 centuries. The Bell property, particularly the Bell Witch Cave, is a popular tourist attraction. Visitors report strange occurrences to this day: whispers in the dark, cold spots, and even the sound of faint laughter. The Bell Witch haunting remains one of the most documented and terrifying paranormal cases in American history. Who or what Kate truly was is still a mystery, but her legacy is a chilling reminder that some forces are beyond human comprehension.